Hey Dirt Magicians, I made a ton of gardening mistakes this year because it was my first time growing on a balcony. And while I loved being able to have this urban oasis feeding myself and the bees, like any new project, I made a lot of mistakes. I put some plants in the wrong containers, I used the wrong soil for some plants, and I screwed up my watering in a couple of different ways. We believe at Dirt Magicians that you learn just as much from your successes as well as from your failures. So I'm really excited to share today my mistakes so that you don't make the same ones. So my first mistake was a result of choosing the wrong potting mix for the first few containers that I was growing in. I ended up picking a potting mix that was really woody and quite dense. And that meant I actually lost some beets and carrots as the plant roots weren't able to go down into the soil to be able to form the rooty structures. Fortunately, this was a small bag of soil that I bought, and so I switched it up for the rest of my containers and I picked a vegetable-specific potting mix for containers and one that had a very special ingredient, perlite, which is actually an expanded glass that creates this poof-like structure, and it helps a lot with airflow, keeping a soil lighter, and improving drainage. So my second mistake has to do with watering. When it started to really get hot here in the summertime, I had to water more frequently because we lose more water through evaporation. But I sometimes made the mistake of just checking my larger containers for soil moisture. If they felt dry, then I'd water, but if they didn't, I wouldn't. What I didn't realize is how much faster my smaller containers dried out. So a couple of times in the beginning of this warming up process, I had some pretty wilted plants before I smartened up and realized the difference that would make. Straw mulch definitely helped, but it still was gonna be way faster for those smaller plants to dry out. And then part two of the same mistake is if you're going away at all, make sure to tell family members about checking those smaller containers. I forgot to do this and I came home from a few vacations and some of those smaller pots with plants in them were definitely looking a bit wilted. Dirt Magicians, let us know in the comments what mistakes you made this year so that others can learn from them. My third mistake is that I planted my squash. So I had some patty pans and kabocha squash and I planted them in grow bags. Now the reason that planting these in grow bags was a mistake has to do with a fungal disease that occurs in what's called the cucurbit family. So that's cucumber, zucchini, squash, and that is powdery mildew. Here in the Pacific Northwest, powdery mildew is pretty much an inevitability just because of our damp climate, and powdery mildew likes warm, damp conditions. But the grow bags add to this as the sides of the container stay damp for most of the growing season. So it creates a really great habitat for powdery mildew. So with this in mind, what occurred is that all of my squash plants got powdery mildew much earlier in the season than anyone else was getting powdery mildew. And they died a lot earlier as well. So I didn't get as many squash as I would have had I planted in plastic containers. So for future, anything from the cucurbit family, and we've linked in the description box all of those vegetables, I will always plant in plastic containers or something that's not a grow bag that stays damp or moist. So my next mistake is that I forgot to ask you to tap the like button if you're gaining value from this video. It supports our channel and lets us know that we're creating useful content for you. So the next mistake I made was around not monitoring for pests frequently enough and then subsequently not doing controls as soon as I noticed pests. What I didn't realize is that compared to a regular garden that has lots of natural ground predators such as centipedes and ground beetles, in a patio you're adding a sterile potting mix so you don't have as much of an ecosystem naturally occurring. And also, because there were parts of my balcony that were made with wood, I had a lot of earwigs and slugs already sort of living in them. And so when I added young seedlings, they were eaten very quickly. So in future, I'm gonna monitor more frequently, and then as soon as I see those pests, I wanna add some kind of a trap or a control to minimize them. If you wanna learn more about pest management, then we have a mini course for you. In this mini course, we'll discuss identification of pests, controls, how to create an ecosystem out of your garden so that you don't have to implement as many controls and the predators of garden pests can. You know, you spend all of this time, money, and resources in the vegetable garden. The last thing you want to have happen is some kind of pest eating your vegetables before you do. So invest in the knowledge of learning how to deal with these pests. You can find the link for our mini course in the description below. So my last mistake is that I didn't account for the angle of the sun being so drastic. Because there's a roof on my balcony, the sun can only ever enter at an angle. As a result, where it hits on the balcony drastically changes between the spring, the summer, and the fall. So I needed to move my plants around fairly frequently to maximize the sunlight that they would get. If you want to learn in more detail how I did this, as well as how I designed this beautiful balcony garden, then we made a video all about it, which you can check out here.